This video will provide an overview for the second concept of Unit 5, Parallelograms. There will be a tutorial to follow this that will assist with assignment 5.2b. To properly understand the properties of a parallelogram, it's important to have mastered vocabulary from Unit 2, Parallel Lines and a Transversal. It is vital that you are able to identify all of the vocabulary terms that are listed right here. Okay? I'm just going to go over some of these as a quick review. And I'm going to point them out on this diagram here. So consecutive angles are angles of a figure that are formed by the same line, consecutive angles. So 4 and 14 would be consecutive angles. Opposite angles are angles that are across from each other, not formed by the same line. So 5 and 14 would be opposite angles. Supplementary angles are angles whose sum is 180 degrees. 3 and 4 would be a pair of supplementary angles. Congruent angles are angles that have the same measure. So 2, 4, 6, and 8, those would all be congruent angles. Right angles are angles whose sum are 90 degrees. There are none listed here, but an example would be angle JHL there. Adjacent angles are angles that share a side and a vertex. So an example of an adjacent angle would be 14 and 13. Alternate interior angles are an angle pair formed by two parallel lines and a transversal that is between the parallel lines and alternate sides of the transversal. So examples of alternate interior angles would be 13 and 10, 14 and 11, 10 and 8, 5 and 9, 4 and 6, 3 and 5, 4 and 15, and 14 and 1. Same side interior angles are an angle pair formed by two parallel lines and a transversal that is between the parallel lines and on the same side of the transversal. So 14 and 4 would be a same side interior angles, 15 and 1, 13 and 11, 14 and 10. A linear pair is an angle pair formed when a line intersects a straight line. So 13 and 14 are a linear pair, as well as 11 and 10. Vertical angles are an angle pair formed by two lines that intersect. Two sides are opposite rays. 13 and 15 are vertical. 16 and 14 are vertical. 1 and 3, 2 and 4. An angle bisector is a line that divides an angle into two congruent angles. Parallel lines are two lines that never intersect. Congruent lines are two lines that are congruent to each other. Perpendicular lines are two lines that intersect and form right angles. A segment bisector is a line that intersects a segment and its midpoint, dividing it into two congruent segments. And a perpendicular bisector is a line that bisects a segment, creating a right angle. And then the theorems that you need to know are the triangle angle sum theorem. That's that three angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. Isosceles triangle theorem. It's a triangle in which two of the sides are congruent, and this means that the angles opposite the two sides are also congruent to each other. And then the Pythagorean Theorem is that the square of the hypotenuse of a right triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the two legs of the right triangle, or a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And then slope of the line is the rate of the vertical distance of a line over its horizontal distance. All right, so a parallelogram is a quadrilateral in which both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. So as you see here, we've got two pairs of parallel lines, and a parallelogram is formed right here in the middle. So parallelograms, some other characteristics about them are their opposite angles and opposite sides are congruent. So their opposite sides are congruent and the opposite angles are congruent. Consecutive angles are supplementary because they're same side interior angles. So 4 and 14 are going to add up to 180, 14 and 10 are going to add up to 180, 10 and 5, and so on. The diagonals bisect each other. So if you look at this parallelogram right here, these two diagonals are going to bisect each other, which means that this segment is going to be congruent to this one, and this segment is going to be congruent to that one. Okay, parallelograms as a broad category can be divided into three subcategories. So the three subcategories are parallelograms, rhombus, and rectangle. Rhombus and rectangle, they're both parallelograms, so they have all of the characteristics of a parallelogram, but they have different characteristics from each other. So main thing to remember about a rhombus is that it has 4 sides that are congruent. And then its diagonals are perpendicular. It means they're going to have 4 right angles. Sorry, here. It's a rhombus right there, 4 right angles. And then the diagonals also bisect the angles that they intersect. So this angle right here, JKN, will be congruent to NKL. Those two will be congruent to each other. A rectangle is going to have 4 right angles, and the diagonals are going to be congruent. Okay, so 4 right angles, and then the diagonals will be congruent to each other. And then we've also got squares, which are going to have all of these characteristics that we've gone over. So the diagonals are going to be perpendicular, have 4 right angles. It has every single characteristic. So that is a brief overview of all of the quadrilaterals. The next tutorial is going to cover problems from assignment 5.2b, and feel free to refer back to this video in case you need to review any of the vocabulary.